All right. Thank you, everyone, for being here once again and for being flexible with our spontaneous bio break that we had in the middle of our morning program. I'm now going to welcome you all back to your seats. I'm so excited to see so many conversations happening around the room because that is exactly the goal of today's event. One of the key takeaways from Dr. Spencer was about building community. That's our number one goal for today, and I am so happy to see that's already happening. I will also take this moment to welcome up our panelists to the front of the room, and I'll hand you your microphones as you come up. All right. Now for our next panel, our only panel actually, our next event, Periods Without Peril, Ensuring Safety and Equity in Menstrual Health. We're going to hear from a group of personal sheroes about the work that they're doing on the ground every single day to make sure, is that it? Okay. To make sure that we have quality access to menstrual products here in Massachusetts. It's really great to learn from the work happening across the country and across the world, to know that we are not in this alone. To ground us before we get in, MassNow founded the Massachusetts Menstrual Equity Coalition 5 years ago to introduce the I AM bill. I AM is an acronym for Increased Access to Menstrual Products, and if passed, would make menstrual products free in schools, prisons, and shelters. And 5 years later, we've learned a lot. We've learned that passing the I AM bill is in fact not our goal. Policy in and of itself is not going to solve period poverty. And then not just, in addition to having access to products, we need funding, like Dr. Spencer was saying. And we also need quality products so that we make sure we're not putting toxic chemicals or harmful products out to our most vulnerable populations. And so in order to bring our whole coalition along with what we've learned about what our real goal is for ensuring menstrual equity in Massachusetts, I'm so excited to have this incredible panel of sheroes to join us and tell us about the work that they're doing. We have with us Dr. Yvonne Gomez-Carrion, who's an assistant professor in obstetrics and gynecology at Harvard Medical School. Give her a warm welcome. To her left, we have Dr. Shruthi Mahalingaiah, who's an assistant professor of environmental, reproductive, and women's health at the Harvard Chan School of Public Health. To her left, we have Arion Long, who is our Chief Estrogen Officer, CEO of Femly, a menstrual product company based in Baltimore. So thank you for traveling here. And Dr. Gomez-Carrion, thank you for coming all the way from Connecticut. We have to Arion's left, Mary Ellen Duggan, who is a district wellness coordinator and nurse leader at the public schools of Northborough and Southborough here in Massachusetts. And last but certainly not least, we have Louisa Corbett, who is a menstrual equity activist and high school student in Millston, Massachusetts. Awesome. So to begin, we're going to start with a little bit of fun fact data that we learned while preparing for this panel, in fact, with talking with Dr. Mahalingaiah. Let's see if I can get it up here. So as we've said, menstruation is not new. We have been bleeding forever as a species, and yet it is new to be talking about menstruation as a public policy issue, as an academic issue, as a research issue. And it's so timely that we are working with our bodies ourselves today to make this summit happen. And so in our conversations with Dr. Mahalingaiah, we learned that OBOS has actually played a very specific role in making menstruation visible in the academic space. And so I would love for you to begin by telling us about this graph that you put together and discovered in your research.
Thank you so much, and it's really awesome to be here. So we don't have a lot of time. I could tell you a lot about this, but in 2012, there was an NIH breakout meeting. The public was invited, any researchers could go. It was called Menstruation, Science, and Society. And I had just had twins a year before, and I wasn't really going out of the house that much per se, other than to my work. And a senior colleague was like, "You have to go to this meeting. It's going to be really important." And then the meeting was amazing. I learned a lot, met a lot of people who were researching the menstruation space from a variety of angles. And then they published the proceedings of this 2-day workshop. And in that paper, which is cited here, and it's available online, there was just some commentary on, if you look in PubMed and you put in the search term menstruation, this is what you get. And they compared it to a couple of things. They also looked at a couple of other really important keywords to health around menstruation. I just decided to update the time trend. And in that paper as well, Our Bodies is mentioned. It's an iconic book to me also. But in the, in the 60s and 70s, the first art is the first study of menstrual cycles. It's called the Tremin study. It's in the Midwest. And that was the first time we actually learned about menstrual cycles and how they changed across the lifespan. And then, of course, Our Bodies was published. But if you look at the PubMed citations on menstruation, looking at that specifically, you can kind of see, and then there are about 13,000 between 2001 and 2024. And in the same time, for the other search terms, just as a comparison, you can see how many fold more, even something like erectile dysfunction or prostate cancer. So we do have a long way to go. There is some representation, but it's really exciting to be here and in this conversation to move the needle.
Thank you. It's always so validating, I think, to see data that reflects what we already know. We know that menstruation has been silenced and stigmatized, but it's really rare to have the data to validate that. So I'm super appreciative of you for helping make that visual realistic for us, so that there's lots of future researchers in here and future doctoral students who might be able to be inspired by some of the intersections that we're talking about today. I'd like to continue with you just a little bit, Dr. Mahalingaiah, to talk about some of the intersections in your work and how you were able to have, what does it mean to have environmental studies and reproductive justice combined in your research, and where does menstruation fit into that as well?
Thank you. I'll give a few brief comments, but so I focus on reproductive endocrinology. And my awareness about the environment really started on trips back and forth to India from southern Connecticut. The air quality is much worse in India, and I experienced some skin irritation, difficulty breathing, and then when I went back with my life partner for a reception, there were like 5 infertility clinics right around where my family there lived, and I was just wondering, could air pollution be involved with infertility and gynecologic conditions? And that's what started my research career pathway on this topic. Fast forward a decade, I decided to kind of really hone in on the menstrual cycle. It's one of the most complicated endocrine systems that requires like every organ in the body to work functionally and in concert. We can learn a lot from it, and it is also a kind of litmus test or canary in the coal mine for certain environmental exposures. Anything from stress to actual endocrine disrupting chemicals that can affect all different aspects of it. So I think that we can learn a lot from being in tune with our body, understanding our cycle lengths for whole body health, as well as the interconnection to the environment.
Thank you. And if you have any questions, by the way, please be sure to write them down because we'll be having a Q&A section for you at the very end. But we can continue going down the line now with introductions of saying, what exactly is it that you do? Dr. Gomez-Carrion, we'd love for you to share about your perspective as a gynecological surgeon and educator, and talk about your work with patients specifically and your approach with them to educating them about menstruation and identifying menstrual irregularities.
Wow. That's a lot in 4 minutes. Who's gonna give me a 30-second warning? Because I'm a storyteller, and I'm a girl from Brooklyn originally. Trained in New York, went to Columbia Med School and Columbia Presbyterian Medical Center. And being a recipient of the National Service Corps, I got to relocate to Roxbury, Massachusetts. I had a 4-year commitment, and I was there for 11 years. I enjoyed the work so much. But the entire time, my base hospital was Beth Israel Deaconess, and now Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center. I retired clinically June of 2023. And I must say, I am so happy to be here today because having spent 36 years of my professional life in Massachusetts, to see Mass Now invite me to an event was great. And then our bodies ourselves. I was telling a story this morning that I was raised in a very Catholic household, only child, precocious kid, and I had all these questions, and no one would answer my questions. And it wasn't until I hit high school that I discovered the book, Our Bodies, Ourselves, and it literally saved my life. I thought I was losing my mind, thinking, my body is not what everyone's describing. Is this normal to have a menstrual period at 11? So I have a little outline because I can talk about all of this. But with my patients, the first thing I want to explore is, do you understand what's normal for you and what's irregular? Because we as scientists and physicians and all healthcare providers, we work via statistics. And because we say the average menstrual start, also known as menarche, is at age 12, if you start at 10, is that normal? If you don't start until 15, is that normal? So exploring that. Menstrual regularity tends to, if you have the average onset of having a period at age 12, you don't really start a regular period for a couple of years because you're not ovulating right away. And ovulation is the trigger to menstrual regularity. The normal timing for a period, often the range of 21 to 35 days. And when I start talking about those types of things, I often get a blank look because folks will say, well, how do you measure the cycle? And you start with day 1 of any type of bleeding, whether it's spotting, to the next cycle. And so that can range from 21 to 35 days. But so many things can affect that cycle. So if you skip a period or your cycles elongate or they get shorter, that doesn't mean it's that word, scientific word, abnormal. It's irregular, and we need to find out as healthcare providers with you why you're having this fluctuation in your menses. Average bleeding day is 3 to 7 days. But what's bleeding? What's a normal amount of bleeding? Some folks who have a uterus will spot. Some folks will bleed heavily, and heavy to them is I'm changing a pad or tampon every 12 hours. So it's a very subjective thing. I do a lot of gender diverse care, and I can tell you with my trans men, when they see a spot, that often equates to I'm hemorrhaging. Or you can have someone who's used to heavy menses, and unfortunately, we've normalized changing a pad or tampon every hour. As Wanda Sachs would say, that ain't normal. And, in the medical literature, they will quote that a normal bleeding amount is 30 to 50 cc's or 3 to 5 tablespoons. And I have patients who say, girl, I bleed much more than that. But we have to understand that it's not just blood, it's water, it's mucus, it's the lining, that inner lining of the uterus, or also known as the womb, where if you don't have a fertilized egg, you will shed that lining, whatever your pattern is. And there's so many things, again, that causes irregular cycling. First thing a gynecologist thinks about, if you miss a period, we need to make sure or evaluate you, are you pregnant? And then the question is the pregnancy in the right place? Rule out ectopic pregnancy. Stress, where are we? Today's world. I heard the phrase, we're under attack. We are. Every one of us in this room is under attack. We all have labels. And I can tell you many stories about me being an African-American woman with a Latin last name who sometimes talks really funny. And the way I look, people assume things. And I've had horrendous medical care episodes because I don't wear on my forehead that I'm a physician. Because when I tell these stories, people say to me, Yvonne, you should have told them you're a gynecologist. You're an obstetrician gynecologist. You do these complex surgeries. And my response to them is, why? I'm a human. Why must I wear something that identifies me as part of the club? Therefore, I should get special treatment. So thank you. So we're all living in an environment where there's incredible stress, increased cortisol levels that will definitely affect the functions of that whole menstrual axis, starting with our brain, signaling to the ovary, which signals the uterus that we should be shedding. Those of us that are overweight, normal weightedness, again, is based on statistics. I will never have a BMI of 20. I know that, but I eat healthy, I sleep well, I exercise, I've been meditating 2 to 3 times a day since I was 21. I do all the things I think that I can do to maintain good health. Hormonal imbalance. Now, hormonal imbalance can come up to play if you're on any type of hormonal manipulator. If you're on birth control pills, we have the estrogen progesterone pills. We have the progesterone-only pills. We have shots we can give. I am Depo-Provera, Norplant, the rod we put in your arm, hormonal intrauterine devices, whether it's Mirena, Lalera, Skyla, all these lovely terms, as well as the non-hormonal intrauterine devices like the Paragard, which is copper-based, that can cause a inflammatory response of the lining, so that too can cause irregular bleeding. PCOS was mentioned earlier. Thank you very much. Premature ovarian dysfunction, premature ovarian insufficiency. Why should a person who has a uterus and ovaries at age 25, 30 start showing signs of menopause? That needs to be evaluated. Elevated prolactin, pelvic inflammatory disease. And then there are medical issues that requires the services of someone like myself, a gynecologic surgeon. Anytime a patient comes to me, I need to make sure with my patient, ruling out the medical issues. My job as a surgeon has always been to keep my patient out of the operating room. Because anytime you expose someone to anesthesia or any type of procedure, and I've had colleagues tell me, well, it's a minor procedure. No, once you cross the threshold of an operating room, you're putting your patient at risk. So I take that very seriously. But there are times that we need to go to the operating room. You've had a pregnancy and you've lost the baby and the tissues of the pregnancy are retained or they remain in the uterus. That can subject you to a really bad infection, as you've been probably hearing about in the news now that people have restricted access to evacuation procedures, and people are dying from that. And I expect that to continue, unfortunately. Then there are benign growths in the uterus. You've heard of polyps, right? And so polyps can cause irregular bleeding, hemorrhaging. So we have this little device we can put inside the uterus, a hysteroscope, whether it's flexible, that we can do right in the office, to actually look at the lining of the uterus and not just do a blind curettage, as we used to do early in my training. We didn't have access to technology, so we put this metal instrument into the uterus and just scrape until we got out tissue, hoping not to miss a polyp. Then there are uterine fibroids, which are incredibly common. And depending on the location in the womb, uterus, will determine often how much you'll bleed. So I think that covers the benign entities. And what procedures you should have is based on what your goals are. If you have completed childbearing, whether you want to or not, but if you have completed childbearing, things like endometrial ablation, where we cauterize or seal the blood vessels of the lining, and hysterectomy, taking out the entire uterus, which should be the last treatment modality. Those two things, if you want to have a baby, you shouldn't have those procedures. But things like hysteroscopy, putting in the camera, locating if there is any abnormality of the endometrial lining, that can be removed through direct visualization and is often very helpful. If you have multiple fibroids or one fibroid that's sizable, we can actually remove that fibroid, and that's called myomectomy, because myo in Latin is fibroid, ectomy means removal. So I think that's my thing.
Raise your hand if you've already learned something today. Yep, myself included. Every single time I talk about periods, I learn something new, and I love that. One of the takeaways I'm taking away right now is that there is no normal, right? Every person's period is completely unique to yourself. And the only way that you can really know what's normal for yourself is to really be in tune with yourself. And if you have a question, if you're ever in pain, you should talk to an OBGYN, talk to a doctor to try to explore that more, because there's so many different things that could be going on within your within that box that Dr. Mahalingaiah was talking about. So I'm really excited to learn more about some of the problems or the irregularities that we should know that are possible, and also talk about some of the solutions. So Arion, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about Femly and what brought you to being the Chief Estrogen Officer of Femly.
Sure. Oh my God, so much overlap. So I took notes because I'm a sepsis survivor, and my brain is frazzled. So Arion Long, originally from New York. I am growing a $15 million tech company in Baltimore right now, and ended up becoming one of the first 100 Black women in U.S. history to raise more than $2.6 million for a tech innovation. My company, it's hard. I would give that like 2 out of 5 stars on Yelp, because like being Black and 5 feet tall and like HBCU grad without a tech degree, yeah, my inception of the company was a pain in the ass, but we're here now. And so what Femly is a for-profit tech startup that provides innovative smart dispensers in restrooms around the world. And when you walk up and wave hello to our devices, you get free organic pads and tampons that we also manufacture. My story of inception is like fraught with high highs and low lows. I am a mom who is also an angel mom and survived the stillbirth of my daughter, Sage. And this is important because on this panel, we've already talked about how important it is to know your normal for your body. And I was somebody who knew that. I went into pregnancy with my daughter a freaking beast. Like, I knew the stats. I knew maternal mortality. Before I was even married, I would like go to the beauty supply and show up with the ring because I realized that I was getting different care when I stepped into the office with the ring when I got pregnant. And so in my 5th month of pregnancy, when I started complaining of pain, doctor said, you know, it's normal pregnancy growth. This is your first child, et cetera. And I listened to them. And a few weeks later, what ended up happening was I was diagnosed with a urinary tract infection, which is very, very, very common in pregnancy. But the urgent care facility that I went to gave me an incorrect antibiotic for said UTI. So I took the course of action. You know, doctors will say, we'll call you if we need to change meds. If we don't call you, take whatever we give you. And I did that. And a few weeks later, I woke up to pee in the middle of the night in my 6th, 7th month, and my water broke. And me not having a medical background, because I wanted to be Ben Carson until he opened his mouth, and then switched my major.
Many of us.
Right. Having a medical background, I knew that at the stage of pregnancy where I was at, the babies will, for lack of a better word, urinate and create more amniotic fluid, and it wasn't necessarily a death sentence, but I knew that I was going to have to be prepared to be on bed rest in the hospital for the next 3 to 4 months of the pregnancy. I got 2 days in. I think Harry and Meghan got married that morning because my grandmother was in the hospital room, and I got a fever. That fever turned into my baby girl is no longer kicking, turned into we're going to give you a C-section, turned into I now have 107-degree fever. I am still coherent, I am still speaking, but now I am hemorrhaging out, and my blood is not clotting. So I spent a month on life support. I ended up with E. coli sepsis. In medicine, you don't know, it's a chicken and egg situation. You don't know if the water breaking allowed the E. coli in, because the majority of UTIs are actually caused by E. coli, which I did not know. Or you don't know if you already had E. coli in your uterus, which caused the water to break. But I knew, because I went through 1,200 pages of medical literature about me, that there was a point where that urgent care took my urine sample and never sent it to a lab. So they could have caught it. However, we talked about pregnancy timing and knowing the length of your cycle. I am someone who has a 36-day cycle. How we calculate pregnancy in America is based off the racist assumption that the average woman has a 28-day cycle. That was created by a white man. So in my state, in Maryland, when I went to pursue it, when I went with my medical documents to a lawyer, they were basically saying, they can fight back because technically you're saying you were this gestation, which is where you need to be to have a lawsuit. I think in my state it's 24 weeks. I was like 25 weeks. So I had a case, but the state is saying, well, according to the way we calculate it, you don't have a case. So I had to kind of let it die. And I realized that even if I had gone through with the lawsuit and won, no one is going to hold my hand and apologize for killing my baby girl. They're not going to apologize to me. And fortunately, these people had no idea who they fucked with. So moving into our innovation, I got off of life support. I lost Sage. I decided to get pregnant with my son Asa a year to the date later and have him in a freaking pandemic. But the beauty in that was the world closed up. And I know that that was such a hard time for a lot of people, but I have ADHD, and for me, it was golden. It was like I could finally breathe, and there was only one voice in my head instead of 10. And so while nursing this baby boy, I went around to different buildings, and I realized that, God, these stainless steel dispensers are not only ugly, they're awful. And we're in a coin shortage. Who's gonna have a quarter to put something in? And so I did what I was told the Mark Zuckerbergs of the world do, and I drew this innovation, this dispenser on a napkin. And I went on LinkedIn and I'm like, yo, I'm not an engineer, but I drew this badass thing. I need you to tell me who I should look for to turn this picture into an actual device. And they're like, oh, you need a CAD engineer, you need blueprints, you need this. So every step of the way, people chimed in, and I put up a TikTok. And I say, I know y'all haven't heard from me. I almost died, but I'm here, had another baby. And this is the badass device I created. And here's the first woman using it. And I wake up the next day. I swore my phone was broken. There were 70 million views on that video. It made it from 1.1 million on TikTok to the Shade Room to this to that. And instantly, we had 3,000 companies reach out to purchase this device. But I only had one. So that's where the investment comes in. During the pandemic, while pantless, most of it, I took Zoom calls. I spoke to investors. I found the badass women investors who were starting to open these funds. And one of the fortunate things that happened with the reckoning that we had post George Floyd was that investors started thinking about access to capital in Black companies and female investors, because when I started, there were only 37 Black women in U.S. history to raise $1 million. So I knew it would be an uphill battle. So I started doing Shark Tank style pitch competitions and won 60 of those in a row. Yeah. And that was a wild time. If I walk into the room now, people will leave, and they should. But I think it taught me It taught me a lot about resilience. It taught me a lot about finding something to live for. It taught me that I was bigger than my trauma and the things that I had gone through to get there. And it taught me that, like, no one who is self-made is truly self-made, because I was generally help-made. And so now, this cute dispenser device that I created can be found at Four Seasons, YMCA. We have NFL stadiums, like the Baltimore Ravens has the highest attendance of any female fan base. Like 67% of tickets are bought by women. You would never think that, like, we could be in some of the places that we are. And that was how I came to know Sasha and Mass Now. We were starting to look at how we could be more impactful outside of this gorgeous machine. What does it look like to funnel products into the orgs that need, money into the orgs that need, amplify and use our channels to highlight this across the country? And that's the work that I'm really, really proud of. I do also want to say something, because I took a note. One of the terms that you mentioned was ovarian insufficiency. And I think it's interesting that we call erectile dysfunction a dysfunction and not penis incompetence. But, like, I mean, when we think about what it means to be a menstruator and a woman, I am thinking about the fact that today I wore a gorgeous blazer and I went to put my phone in my pocket and I don't have freaking pockets. That doesn't happen for non-menstruators. And so, you know, I think it's very important that as we all navigate our journeys, we are using the knowledge that we have to empower not only ourselves, but to stand in the gap for those that may not have the same access, the same knowledge, the same equity. Girl, give someone a ring from a beauty supply store so that they can walk into that doctor's office empowered and show up like God sent you everywhere you go.
And I agree. Language is important. And throughout all of my training, when a person with a uterus went into premature labor, they called it cervical incompetence. Yes.
And I had a cerclage that I didn't need, but
There you go. Yeah.
It helped.
Wow, I have chills. It's so exciting to hear about how you've been able to grow family out of what was a really sad situation, and yet I'm sure is going to be a menstrual product that brings so much more joy and acceptance to so many more people around the country. Anytime you see who's gotten their period and did not have a product on them. Yeah, because we have no idea when our period's coming all the time. My period was it's still irregular all the time. I think it's synced up with the full moon until I think I get it, and then I'm wrong like every single month. Makes it really fun to just go around the world wondering, am I going to be bleeding today? And I also never have coins on me anymore. I'm just like a contactless millennial over here. And so anytime I see a menstrual product in the bathroom when I actually need it, I feel so seen. I take a deep sigh of relief. I'm like, oh, it's okay. I don't have to start rushing through. Like, am I going to use toilet paper instead of a menstrual product? Is the toilet paper going to stay in my underwear as I'm going about the day? Will I still be seen as a young professional if I'm bleeding? And you can tell through my pants. I have so many things that go through my head that all are a huge sign of relief whenever I see a menstrual product actually in the bathroom. Mary Ellen, I know that your public schools in Northborough and Southborough have had menstrual products for many, many years. And one of the conversations we've had a lot with school nurses around the state is period poverty is not an issue in our schools because you can go to the nurse and ask for a menstrual product. And yet there are a lot of times where people don't feel comfortable going to the nurse's office, or where students aren't actually allowed to go to the bathroom. And if they are going to the bathroom, there aren't always products in the bathroom. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about your journey with period poverty through your work as a school nurse and how the campaign came to be to get menstrual products in the bathrooms.
Okay, I feel very inadequate after these amazing women here, but I'll try my best. So we are a school district, middle-class suburbia of 4,200 students and about 600 staff, adults. Our journey began, I've been in the school district for 20 years, so there's always been menstrual products in the health office. You can always go there. They're in the bathroom in a little basket, just as it is in most staff places where you go. If you go into a school staff bathroom, there's a nice little basket there. So that we were taking care of ourselves and not thinking much about the students, I don't think. So in 2023, I had 2 groups of students approach me as the wellness coordinator and nurse leader. One was a middle school civics class who wanted to know about the antiquated silver coin-operated menstrual product dispensers that were embedded in the wall in their bathroom that never have had anything in them, and they were coin-operated. So we reached out to the facilities, and they were like, oh, we'll just remove the coin-operated part. I was like, well, do you have the things to go in them, and where are they? And so he's like, they're in a back closet somewhere, so the inches of dust we cleared off of them. And I was like, no, that's not going to work. So we canned that, and we'll get back to the middle school. But those products were older than me, probably. But then the high school student council came to me and said they were concerned about the access to period products throughout the school building, that to get from the furthest room from the health office, it was like a 3-minute, 4-minute walk. And their goal was to have period products within 1 to 2 minutes of every classroom. The goal was really 1 minute, but 1 to 2 we gave it. So we started a pilot project with supplies from the health office through the health budget, and we put the period products in 3 non-gendered restrooms. And the student council, the president of the student council at the time, he came to every school committee meeting. And in his updated every school committee meeting, he talked about pads and tampons. And you can imagine the people that are on the school committee, their eyes were bugging out of their heads. But he came there and he talked about it, and he talked about the equity and what their goal was with this project. So they did that for probably 2 or 3 months, and we wrote a grant together. We wrote a grant to local education foundations, which is not anything like some federal grants where you get millions of dollars. It was $6,000, and we were going to use that to put supplies in every female gendered and non-gendered bathroom in both of our middle schools and our high school. We did that. We got both grants, and then we were lucky to get in touch with the wonderful organization of Free Period Ministry. And Unicorn, yes, that's definitely a godsend to all of us. And they provided the dispensers for us. And Fury, another great person who's tabling here, the CEO of Fury is a friend of mine in a civic organization, and we did a period palooza there. And just period equity was just in my face. And I was just like, gosh, I better pay attention to all of this, right? And it was like a wake-up call to me, like you think you're doing the right thing by having it just in the health office, but really you're not. You know, any person who walks into a restroom should have what they need. You know, every non-menstruator walks in and there's a toilet, there's toilet paper, paper towels, water, a sink. But if you have your period, you don't have what you need. And as we just heard, many of us, almost everybody raised their hand when they said they have been unexpectedly gotten their period, whether their cycle was regular or not. You know, there's been those times where you're wadding up the toilet paper and waddling out of the bathroom. So we can all relate to that, unfortunately. So we did get the grants. We got the product. We brought our organic product through Fury. We got the dispensers through Free Period Ministry and Top/Unicorn, their old dispensers. And we put them in every bathroom in the middle schools and high schools, so 54 restrooms. And when we went through, and this is me just being obsessive compulsive, I did not want to give it to anybody else because I wanted to monitor how much. So I filled every dispenser every Friday and still do. Now we're on an every other week thing. But we're handing it over to our facility staff next year as they have now put it into their budget. We have been blessed because of the grants. We got the grants, and we also got free product from Free Period Ministry that we would never have been able to make it through this year, and hopefully that will give us what we need and not go back to those brush the dust off boxes. And the organic, what we're having our girls put into our body or close to their body is really important to me. So that's why I'm hesitant to give it over to the facility staff, but I think it's a great thing that it is in the budget for next year. We'll get into talking about how to get it into a budget, but you have to talk their language. But to promote this equity, inclusion, all of those things for all of our females, gendered or cisgendered, anybody, any gendered, all gendered people who menstruate and have that opportunity to not have to walk 3 minutes to the health office is a great blessing.
Thank you, Mary Ellen. In my experience, the best activism in schools is a partnership between students and administrators. No one can work without the other. And so it's so exciting to see you who were able to hear the cry from students, non-menstruating students even, and really champion it and lead it and fill the dispensers yourself. I'm glad to hear that facilities will be taking that over soon, because I know it's a lot of work to go through all the bathrooms.
I know my way around.
I wanted to say something really quick.
Yeah.
First of all, power to you. Like, that's so badass. One of the things that I've also noticed when it comes to like facilities taking over is there ends up being a really big push on research and then policy support. So for example, Femly launched in DC. DC's law states that you have to provide free products. It has to come through a free buttonless dispenser, and the products absolutely have to be 100% certified organic cotton. So we're starting to see like school systems are going to take it a step further. But like one of the things that came out of working with schools for us is every device that we have includes health education and Braille for students who might have visual impairment. And it not only tells them like how to use our machine, it's like touch here for pads, touch here for tampons too. There's like windows for janitorial teams to see inventory. But like we spent 2 years making changes every 3 months based on that data.
That's awesome.
The more you know. Louisa, I know you also had the pleasure of working with Kenzie from Free Period to bring menstrual products to your school, and you didn't just stop at bringing products to your school. You've also been working with students to make sure that schools in your city also have menstrual products. I would love for you to tell us, how did you get involved in this work? What brought you here?
Yeah, so I started getting involved with menstrual equity advocacy in middle school with Free Period Ministry that you mentioned. It was based out of my church. So Kenzie was a really big part of like starting my journey there. And then I go to Milton Academy, which is half boarding, half day school in Milton, but I live in Hingham. And so once I got to Milton, one of the first things I noticed was the school has an over $350 million endowment, and it did not have period products in its bathrooms, and it's half boarding school, and it did not have period products in its bathrooms. So that was one of the biggest first inequities that I noticed when I got to Milton. So the first thing that I did with one of my friends was we applied to be a club, an extension of Free Period at Milton, so we were going to call ourselves Free Period Talk. And so Milton has an 8% club acceptance rate, so unfortunately we did not get accepted to be a club. They said that a menstrual equity club was too similar to the pre-existing gender equity club, which they are different things, but we moved forward. My friend and I, we decided that we didn't want to stop our mission after being rejected as a club, so we went a little bit behind the back of our administration, and we co-founded this. It's now an interscholastic menstrual equity coalition called Free Period Talk, and we have chapters at now 7 schools across the South Shore. And we do have a Milton Academy chapter, it's just not an official club. And so through that, my friend and I, we've done a lot of work with schools across the South Shore. We have like coalition-wide drives, and then we also do a lot of advocacy with the IAM bill that's currently in the Massachusetts Congress. But specifically at Milton Academy, my friend, her name's Rhea, we wanted to have products at Milton Academy. So the past 3 years, I'm now a junior, but this started my freshman year, we'd been trying to get in touch with the administration to try and set up meetings to see like who we need to talk to, how we can go about putting products in the bathrooms. And really for the first like year and a half, we were just kind of evaded. We would send scheduling requests that, you know, would be ignored, or someone would be like, oh, talk to my like staffer or like my assistant, and then never get back in touch with us. But last spring, after we launched Free Period Talk, a staff member reached out to us, a faculty member reached out to us, and she said she's a Penn Fellow, so as part of her fellowship, she would love to support our project. So this past fall, we've really kicked off. We got in contact with Milton's like financial office, their budgeting office. We got in contact with facilities, in contact with the nurses and different teachers and different students around the school. And we've been conducting like school-wide surveys to see where the need is. Milton's campus is spread out across its multiple different buildings, so we've been analyzing like, do we need it in the athletics facility, in the arts building, the math building, and so we're now in the process of writing a proposal to our school's financial office to get this included in the facilities budget, and we would have in the facilities contract like what they need every week to restock. And so it's been really exciting to see and really gratifying to see how that's all been coming together after 3 years.
I'll just add to that. It costs our district 3 cents per day per menstruator to
Wow.
supply everybody.
That's a great statistic to show how cheap and affordable something that menstrual products, which are necessary for a student's achievement, can be. Which is a great transition. Well, first of all, I want to say, Louisa, how inspiring it is because there's so many students who've been a part of our coalition who have graduated high school and graduated college and still not seen the IAM bill pass, and that can feel really frustrating. Granted, many of the issues that Mass Now is working on, we've been working on for over 50 years. And yet, your perseverance, you know, while you might not have been able to become an official club, the real goal wasn't becoming an official club. The real goal was distributing period products at your school and galvanizing your peers in order to build more momentum around that. So that's so exciting to see how the goal and the solution can be even bigger than what you originally thought it might be. Mary Ellen, one of the things we hear a lot from school nurses and also from legislators is that menstrual products are a luxury. You know, this is not an urgent issue. We have so many urgent issues facing schools right now. And I think the experience might be, well, we never had period products that were free for us when we were in school, and we were able to, you know, get through life. And so now students these days are more needy. Have you seen or heard any of that feedback in your activism? And specifically as a school nurse, why is this not just a luxury item? Why is this necessary for students?
I think if you're talking to school administration or leaders, you need to talk their language, right? It's not public health language they need to hear. It's not medical language they need to hear. It's not your reproductive language. They just need, you need to speak their language. You need to talk absenteeism, right? That's top on everybody's list now. If you go to a DESE website, absenteeism is their focus. So you need to talk about that. Like lack of product, period poverty, leads to increased absenteeism.
And lack of funding.
Lack of fun, yes. So I think that when you're talking, you need to talk their language. You need to talk about equity. That's, you know, that it's not equitable. Experience of our students needs to be equitable. They need to have the same chance to experience all the same things and not be worried about, Is my period going to impact me participating if I don't have the supplies? So I think when you're speaking to administration, and you need to just speak their language and know that it's not a luxury. This is a human basic right and need.
Thank you. Louisa, I'm going to ask you another question, and then we'll keep it going down the panel as well. What's something that you wish other students knew? So there might be some people here who aren't menstrual activists yet, but are definitely inspired now hearing you talk. What's something that some advice that you can give?
Yeah, so I already spoke briefly about this, but we did not have in any way our administration support to begin with, and I feel like in freshman year I definitely thought, oh, this has to be super official. I have to go through the dean and I have to go through my teachers, and that's the only way that people are going to take me seriously. But what ended up working was kind of, I made it work myself. My friend and I, we started our coalition without administration support, and eventually people took notice after we were already doing our own thing. So you definitely don't need an adult and official support to get started, although once you get along the process it's nice to have. And then the other main thing is, as we're trying to expand to different schools, honestly just cold emailing. I'll just reach out to the school nurse at Tabor Academy, for example, be like, hi, do you know anyone that's interested in opening a chapter of menstrual equity at your school? And a lot of the time people won't respond, but that's also how we opened 3 of our chapters. So just being innovative in the way that you outreach to people, and not following a quote unquote traditional path, because a lot of the times they don't end up working out traditionally how you would expect.
Your anti-authoritarian feminism starts here. We haven't started already. Arion, what's something that people should know when choosing a menstrual product? And I'll just emphasize how exciting it is to have a choice. When I started doing research on periods 10-ish years ago, I read that Procter & Gamble had over 70% of the market. Most people didn't think about having a choice. There was just a familiar brand, and how dangerous that is, because those companies also don't have the same requirements for disclosing which ingredients go into their products, because they are the OG menstrual products that have been sold forever. And so what's something that we all know we have a choice. We all know about Femly and Fury and Unicorn and so many amazing women-led entrepreneurial companies. How do we begin to choose what's a good product for us?
I can't undersell the importance of Googling and looking at ingredients, looking at the advocacy, looking at the founders of these companies, the movements and things that they follow, and more, because you all have gotten the story of how I created our dispenser. I started the actual company because I had a tumor linked with chemicals and Procter & Gamble products. And it was a 26-year-old white guy who was like, hey, there's a study out of the NIH starting to link these ailments in women like you with some of these chemicals. So, I think that's important. I think the other thing is collaboration. When choosing a product, you want to go for the organization or authority that is going to be the most collaborative, and look at not only your health, but the health of those you're advocating for as a team effort. While I've had so many great experiences in the menstrual equity space from the standpoint of founder, I've also had some horrible experiences at the hands of other founders. And so, I tell people, notice where I'm at, but notice when I'm not at certain events. It's likely because there's someone in the room who actually is harmful. And I would say that all money isn't good money. When it comes to funding and access, you really want to pay attention to how some organizations are formed. For example, there's a really big menstrual care company that was under fire because they had a chapter style approach. But when you looked under the hood, what they were doing was essentially having all of the smaller menstrual equity companies around the country close their nonprofits and form under their chapter and name so that they could get the shine. And like that CEO was removed, but that CEO has gone on to raise millions and start another company. And so, if you don't know, you can't really choose better. So collaborate, make choices with intention, and then leverage knowledge and resources. For example, on our website, for organizations that are starting and may want to bring period care to their school, but they don't know how, we have a resource page that has a letter that you could submit to your administration. We have email templates, we have fact sheets you can download, we have surveys you can custom brand, and our team will send you all of the responses to make it easier. Because when you don't know how to advocate in this way for larger change, it makes it so much easier to leverage, the voices and data of those around you.
Thank you. And I'll just add one thing that we're really excited about is that we are pro-choice of products. You don't have to choose one product for your whole flow. You can choose a product that might be good on lighter days and another product that's good on heavier flow days. And you never know what product is good until you try it, but they're not free most of the time to try. We know that. And so that's why Mass Now this past year distributed over 200,000 different types of menstrual products around the state, and are going to be continuing to partner with Femly and many of the other companies mentioned so that folks can have the opportunity to try what product is good for them.
That's so true. It's funny. I love the Flex menstrual cup because it has like a little loop and it's easier to like take out. But like even as a founder that has a Femly cup, the shock that people have when I say that. Do whatever, works for you and diversify.
And if you're listening right now and you're like, I have no idea what a cup is, that's fine, because we have a workshop in a little bit that will give you everything you need to know about all the different types of products, led by Kathy and Bria. But as we continue our panel, and I hope you're thinking of questions because I'm going to be coming to you next, Dr. Mahalingaiah. There's a lot of focus in women's health around reproductive health, which is great. But we know that these conversations can't start when someone becomes pregnant or is thinking about becoming pregnant. So how can we learn more about ourselves through our pre-contraceptive health in order to prepare for our reproductive health, or even if we're not thinking about becoming pregnant one day? And specifically, there's something that we've talked about that I would love for you to elaborate more on, the idea of menstrual blood as a vital sign and what could be possible when we start to study menstrual blood more. That's a lot, I know, so wherever you can.
So many nice questions. So, well, Sasha and I had the opportunity of talking earlier, so sometimes what I think I'm sharing with you, I've actually only shared with Sasha before, but really thinking about health across the lifespan with how our bodies change as an introduction or a kind of like entryway, a threshold. You can have curiosity to start learning about what's happening now and how that might impact your future. In terms of, health across the lifespan, definitely we focus on reproductive health. OBGYN training is heavily on the obstetrics, the childbearing. And as I've gone through my career, expanding the time before that from when you get your first period, understanding cycle patterns, to how those actually predict later life health is a focus of my research, but also is important to learn about. How to get information, I just encourage everyone to know that there's not one most important time or one most important kind of physical sign or symptom. I feel like we've had a lot of learning on the self-breast exam, and I think what I've been sharing a little bit in my clinical practice as well as in my research is thinking about the menstrual cycle as a vital sign, understanding, what, and asking those questions. What does it mean to have your period early or late, or not get it, or get it on a pattern that doesn't, seem to be the same as maybe the average that's been published on, and how might that have implications? And then also understand through, tracking your own body and how it changes over time in a journal. There's so many apps I do research with that are that's app interface, but there's a lot of ways to kind of learn about ourselves to then seek that knowledge with whether it's medical care providers or other trusted sources of information from the allied professionals, school nurses, peer groups, midwives. I think that there's a lot of potential, and I'm just so inspired to see how we can come together to kind of get that information out, because there's a lot of misinformation. And then Dr. Gomez-Carrion mentioned lifestyle health, and I think it's really, really important to note that a variety of lifestyle factors, even if we're not at a what's quote unquote ideal body mass index, or you don't get as many steps as the tracker that's telling you to do that is, or you're not drinking as many ounces of water, but if you're on the pathway to trying to get a little more hydration, doing a little more physical activity, that is enjoyable to you, it will, meditation practice, so many things to actually improve your sense of health and wellness, and then you can see how that might impact kind of your whole body health as it impacts the menstrual cycle. But I do think the menstrual cycle is a vital sign, just like blood pressure, heart rate, oxygen levels. I think we can learn a lot about our health through the cycle. Sometimes it's something you need to see a doctor about, and sometimes it's not. But knowing that can help. And of course, I had someone say, well, what does that mean for menopause? There's no more vital sign. Is it over? And of course, what you know about the menstrual cycle when you have it, I think also can inform when you don't have it. And having irregular cycles kind of in the midlife, getting to menopause, I think is even more confusing, and that's something I'm trying to understand more. Like, how is that pattern changing in menopause? How can we counsel patients better about being irregular before and then being a different kind of irregular at the transition? I think is something where we need more conversation and education about, to help people not be afraid at home and have a lot of anxiety about that.
I'm giggling because I feel like in my 20s, if you would have told me like ovulation, luteal phase, I didn't know that. I didn't notice the difference. In my 30s, it's like the week before my period, you have to lock me in a closet because I'm a vampire and I'm mean. And then like the ovulation phase, I'm like howling at the moon. But we don't have these convos. We need to talk to each other, and we need to talk to the women before us.
Thank you so much for sharing that. We're actually seeing for some kinds of PCOS, you actually start ovulating more regularly in the mid-30s. And it's been known clinically, there's a handful of papers on this, but we're kind of trying to share that at a population level, we're seeing patterns that you might, identify with, and it's not so unique per se. Everyone's unique, but there's a group of people that are experiencing the same thing, and what does that mean for long-term health is super important. One of the things I mentioned talking with Sasha earlier is I assumed that, just like in all our books, there was a black box. That was the black box she was talking about around the uterus, fallopian tubes, ovaries, and upper vagina. And I thought that nothing could get in. It was pristine. It would be protected because it was deep in the pelvis, and no one really talks about it anyway. Just like I spent a little time in the Amazon basin, and I thought, this beautiful kind of rainforest is untouched. But unfortunately, just like fantasies, it evaporated quickly, at least in the rainforest, when I saw a lot of destruction from industrialization, and then getting deeper into what chemicals, where do chemicals go? Where do different toxicants go, microplastics? And understanding that just drawing a box around something or geographic lines on a map doesn't separate kind of where potential pollutants and disruptors can go, and that the body is interconnected all across itself as well as to our planet. I know I'm getting kind of a large concept here, but a lot of my research does exposure outcome relationships, and is kind of really negative findings. Sometimes we don't find associations. A lot of times we do on a variety of things: PFAS, air pollution, bisphenols. And one of the most inspiring things I'm taking from this conversation is hearing how quickly, groups and innovators can find solutions to reducing exposure, because one of the hard things is when you have this kind of patterning or you think something is normal. Like, for example, I've always used always period products, and it wasn't until I was interested in understanding the chemicals in menstrual blood, because that is right next to the endometrial lining. Could this predispose to cancer? Could this influence other things, early pregnancy loss, before you might even know you're pregnant? And so I collaborated with Diva Cup, and they were really exciting. They sent over their products. I evaluated it, and I thought, I can't ask anyone to do this until I try it myself. And, being a gynecologist and a surgeon, I even was like, wow, I feel like I have to do a surgical procedure to get this out of me. And how can I ask anyone to do this? But then I got used to it over time. I was like, I can't have people going in the emergency room and call it, on-call doctor taking these out. But I got used to it and realized what a great opportunity this is to study the menstrual blood. And I collaborated with amazing people. Collaborators are super important. How do you collect this? When is the most important day? Because the first day really is the most like the environment that's in the uterus. By the second day, we're getting what's in our peripheral blood. And all of this is important to know, but I didn't really know this when I started. And what we saw in the first day blood is everything you put on your face, pills you take, Tylenol, acetaminophen, resveratrol, which is in a lot of products, and then a variety of things you eat, things you might drink, are able to be determined in the menstrual blood with a metabolomic or exposomic approach. So this really eradicated any sign of a box that could be around the uterus, was taken away from me, and that was recently. Yeah.
I want to use the stems. I want to research the stem cells.
Very cool. Yes, there's just so much to learn. It used to just be thought of a discarded material thing, something that you don't talk about. And some people are using menstrual blood stem cells for makeup. Yes. Yeah. There's just so many cool things that you can learn with curiosity. So, Sasha, I hope I answered your question.
You did. That was amazing. Okay. I think it's so cool that next time you're bleeding on your first day and you're like, ugh, just throw it away as soon as possible. You can be like, everything that's inside me is in this blood. If I only had the chemical test in order to figure it out. One day, 5 years, 10 years from now, I think this will become a lot more common knowledge. And it's really just amazing to think we are 51% of the population, us menstruators. And if our health was centered as much as erectile dysfunction health was centered, for example, this would be common knowledge. But you heard it here first, and just you wait until the over-the-counter home test hits CVS one day. All right, so our last question, Dr. Gomez-Carrion. From me, I, of course, wrote 30 questions, and I'm getting to 6 of them. But before I hand it over to everyone, I would love for you to talk about perimenopause. Maybe folks have heard of menopause before, but who's never until today heard of perimenopause? Okay, well, I see some shy hands. Don't be shy. I had only heard about it very recently. And I think that there's a myth that menstruation is only when we're bleeding, right? Our cycle is actually happening all month long. And also there's a myth that menstruation is only something that impacts us for a certain amount of time. But actually learning more about perimenopause will help us all as individuals really prepare for menopause and take more control over our options and our health. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about what is perimenopause and how can we, even if it seems very far away to some of the people here, how can we sort of look out for it? And then similarly, what does a holistic approach to healthcare look like?
It's going to be more than 3 minutes.
Okay, you got it.
So we have a good understanding about menses, the rhythmicity of it, whatever it means to you. The perimenopause often is associated with irregular bleeding, mood changes. You notice certain changes in your body, in the way you respond to people, and a lot of that may be hormonal driven, or your experiences with your external environment, whether that be animal, person, nature, whatever. And perimenopause is a range. If the average age of menopause is 50, 51, we think of perimenopause, it can start as early as 45, and things happen. And having raised 5 children, and when I was perimenopausal, I had to warn them because my other self, and I actually named her Betty, I would tell, actually my colleagues at work, my patients, and my family, Betty is here. And let them know when Betty was getting up from a sitting position. Because I think certain things, and the way I was able to express those thoughts, those words weren't me. I tend to think of myself as a kind and compassionate person, and became a snapping turtle, particularly with my adolescent children, because they knew how to press Betty's buttons. So the hormonal changes that occur, and a lot of folks with uteri and wombs will see their primary care doctor or their gynecologist because of the irregular bleeding. You're used to this certain pattern, and all of a sudden, you're bleeding, your cycle is every 14 days, or it prolongs. And you need to get that evaluated because there is that thing called precancer and cancer. And earlier I talked about the benign conditions, but with all the hormonal changes, sometimes that inner lining of the uterus is very sensitive to that. And it's really important. And unfortunately, again, in our society, we have normalized irregular bleeding and pain. You get patted on the head or shoulders, depending on who's doing the patting. That's pretty normal. Don't accept that. Don't accept that. You know your body. You are your best healthcare provider. And I always encourage everyone, be like that dog with a bone. If you feel something's not right, follow your gut because usually it's not right. Doesn't mean there's something bad going on, but you need to have a conversation with one of your healthcare providers because theoretically we have access and a little more knowledge about certain things. Not always, but have that dialogue. But just to go on for a little tangent, remember I told you I grew up in a Catholic home, and I was a precocious child. At the age of 8, I declared to my family that I was going to be a priest and a physician. So deny the naysayers. I can't tell you how many people said, oh God, you can't be a doctor. You'll never get married and have kids. Wrong. You'll never be a physician. Wrong. You'll never be a priest. Well, they were kind of right about that, but I'm a physician who preaches. And thank you. The first thing I like to share with patients, and what I wish patients knew, and this goes along with the holistic approach, when you make an appointment with a new provider, take a friend. You need an extra set of ears. And even for my patients, I encourage them to bring friends and family every visit because healthcare professionals are forced to see lots of patients. And this is what we do all the time. And so we talk faster and faster and faster. And you're sitting there going, what the hell did she just say? And so the person you bring with you can be your scribe. I actually encourage my patients, and beware of the provider who says, oh no, I'd rather you not do that. I said, turn on your phone, record this visit. Because everything I'm saying, yep, I'm not perfect, and I may misspeak, but I enjoy folks challenging me. And you should feel comfortable in any relationship because your healthcare provider and yourself, that's a relationship. And what's important in relationships? Trust, knowing that you're getting good information, and feeling satisfied that you've been heard, respected when you leave your visit. And if someone's rushing you, and I've done this once in my life, I had a dermatologic issue, and this provider who came highly recommended opened the door, looked at me, and basically stood at the threshold of the exam room and wrote a script, just looked at me, didn't even ask me anything, wrote a script and said, here. And the medical assistant who brought me in said, oh, why are you still sitting here? The doc was in. I said, I have no idea. This person came in, looked at me, and gave me this piece of paper. She goes, well, that was the visit. I said, well, I'm not leaving until that person or someone else comes back because I have questions. And you have the right to do that. They may fuss, but I refuse to leave. So you have to get the cops to bring me out. And they go, oh my. And I'm sure they put some probably not so great notes about the non-compliant or angry black woman or all of that about me. And that's okay. I think it's important. I'm a data geek, so when patients come to me, I'd like to know what your menstrual pattern is. So whether you journal it, with our technology now, there are menstrual apps out there, and I highly encourage you to use those, because when you start changing, you'll notice that, oh yeah, how come I'm used to having a cycle every 30 days, and it's been 40? And you don't have to run into an office right away, but see what happens the next time. And go through the checklist. Am I being stressed? What's going on in life? But have a conversation. And don't ever give your provider a pass. Your questions must be answered. Now, if you've been in the office an hour with the provider, they may say, like I say sometimes, I see you have additional questions. Let's make a follow-up visit for that. And that's fine. But you know your body the best, and if it doesn't feel right, it's often not right. And stress management, I mean, the holistic approach to menses and irregularities, we talked about it. You know, trying to do better every day as a human, to sleep better. And just because you're not aware of your environment doesn't mean you're getting quality sleep. And so you really need to kind of bring everything down before actually going to bed, however you can achieve that. Turning off the TV, not looking at your phone screen, not having a exciteful conversation, particularly if it's not mostly positive, before going to bed. And just trying to release that negative energy, because as we go through our day, there's so much negativity that's thrown at us that you may not even be aware of. So whether you meditate or you have a word to focus on, just to clear your minds, because our brains are incredibly busy, depending on all that we're dealing with. And the healthier you can be, the better. And every day I make an affirmation. And Wednesday, when I was teaching my almost 4-year-old grandson and his 3 cousins who are 5, 7, and 9 about the digestive tract, because they're all athletes, I'm getting them to learn this particular affirmation. And I'd like to read it, and then I'd like us to say it together, if that's okay. I am magnificently made, and I promise to do everything in my power to keep my mind, body, and spirit healthy. All right, you ready? I am magnificently made, and I promise to do everything in my power to keep my mind, body, and spirit healthy. Thank you.
Well, these transitions could not have been more perfectly unplanned, so thank you for that affirmation. I'll share, we have in the front tabling outside those doors trackers so that you can also track your own period. And then if you were the lucky winner of the Cycle Journal, there's lots more tracking you can do here. But I've used the period tracker app myself for the last 10 years because it's so convenient because it's on my phone. But I know there's a lot more fear, rightfully so, about data being sold without our consent around and what that means for our reproductive health outside of Massachusetts especially, but also inside of even here. So if you're interested in the old-fashioned way, you can take one of these for free, and you can write when you're bleeding and then also write your mood and how you feel, or maybe what worked for you that day, so that you can look back in future months and have a record, or even take this to your doctor's visit. Yeah.
I forgot to mention one really important thing, talking about perimenopausal. What's menopause? Menopause is when you have not seen any blood, whether it's pink staining or flow, for 365 days. And that's really important, because if you're at 360, you're not menopausal yet. Say you've gone 370, 390 days, and then you have a period. Again, as Wanda Sykes says, that ain't normal. And you have to get that evaluated because of the benign issues that can come up, can present themselves, stress, or could you have polyps, fibroids, precancer, or cancer. So it's really important. Once you've had cessation of menses, if you start bleeding again, that needs to be evaluated.
Thank you. All right, I can keep going with questions, but it's your turn. So let's take 3 questions from the audience. We'll do the first 3 that we see. All right, 1, 2, and then 3 in the back. And Kathy, thank you for bringing the microphone. Red pants in the front, and then the woman behind.
He's being mean to me. Oh my God, it's on. Okay. Don't call me that. I'm just kidding. Hi. Hi. Love you guys. Great. Thank you for being here, etc. I'm going to make this about myself. I have endometriosis. And so either because of that or I'm on a med, I haven't been getting my period. Like it's stopped. And I've been dying to, nobody has had a good answer for me, so maybe y'all will, but how do I track anything? Because stuff is still happening, I know that, because some days my own Betty comes out, some days it's, so I know stuff is still going on, but I don't know how to track it without that very crucial data point, and there are no good apps, there's no good anything. So do you have comments, thoughts, advice? Hey, girl.
Yeah, I can just say something briefly. I think that if you're noticing a pattern, you can actually do just symptom tracking of any kind. And there are a variety of apps available for just symptom tracking or journaling, but just being really dedicated daily to kind of doing that, and then a pattern may emerge. And you can also talk to your provider or anybody with the knowledge that can kind of help you understand which medications may actually suppress what is underlying the ovulatory menstrual cycle, to understand if what you're trying to get at a deeper level is due to hormone fluctuations due to ovulation, or fluctuations from something else due to something else. And I think all of those are good reasons to start looking at it.
I just wanted to say, kudos to you for sharing that. I had no idea how serious endometriosis could be. So the way it was described to me is like a spider web. And while I'm not a physician, think of having internal spider webs to different degrees. And I have a friend who did the makeup for Beyonce. She's a really big MUA. But it was crazy because I learned about the term endometriosis from her when she took a flight. I wish.
Hey, girl.
From my friend Michaela Warby on TikTok, who took a flight and had her lung collapse. She landed the flight, couldn't breathe, and her lung collapsed because she had stage 3 or stage 4 endometriosis. So her spider web went from her uterus to her lungs and collapsed her lung. But if you think of it in terms like that, we women or menstruators casually throw these terms around, PCOS, endometriosis, and really imagine a spider web attached to a penis that was collapsing a lung. This would be a bigger deal. So yeah, track your symptoms.
To me, it was described as polka dots.
Really?
Yes. And sometimes they're big dots that can be removed, and then sometimes they're small dots everywhere that are harder to remove. That's how I was.
So again, everything has variation. And most folks, because endometriosis is when you have overgrowth of cells that originate from that lining of the uterus that are found other places. When it goes into the muscle of the uterus, of course you have to have different terms. It's called adenomyosis. It's outside of the uterus. We call it endometriosis. And because it's estrogen driven, that's why I'm glad we have an estrogen CEO on the panel. It's estrogen driven. Most medications suppress estrogen and put you in a pseudo-menopausal state. And we as healthcare providers think, oh, it's working because you're no longer menstruating. So it's taken effect. Now, when I trained back in, oh my God, the late 70s and early 80s, we had this very simplistic thought about how endometriosis got to where it gets. And it's this concept called retrograde flow, where the cells from that inner lining, because we're an open system, if you have a vault, cervix, uterus, fallopian tubes, and ovaries, the cells travel into the fallopian tubes, drop out into the pelvis, and can get placed on your bladder, outside of the uterus, bowel, etc. Well, we now know that's not quite the whole picture. Where at autopsies, folks who had endometriosis, when they did brain biopsies, they found endometriosis in the brain. So, there's a diaphragm there. Yeah. You're well treated, don't worry. We also had this concept that because estrogen drives the growth of endometriosis, when you become menopausal and your estrogen levels drop, no more worries with endometriosis. False. The implants create their own estrogen, so they're self-perpetuating. So endometriosis is on my list of evildoers in a body, going along with fibroids as well. So again, from womb to tomb, we have to be really in tune to our body, how our body usually functions, and when something changes, talk to somebody.
I want to edit my subscription on periods. What? I wish you could, right? Like, I'm just going to skip them up. Like, edit your period subscription. Like Netflix.
You build it, it will happen.
Save some money.
Yeah, like, just opt out for a few months. Yeah.
You can do that. We have that technology.
Oh, hormonal, right?
Yeah.
Non-hormonal.
I'd love to hear you speak on a topic that I would guess has affected probably a majority of women in this room of ever having had your, especially in gynecological procedures or just seeking reproductive health, having had your pain ignored, minimized, dismissed, or refusal to treat. And it is a topic I've seen, I feel like of late, coming out a little bit more of people advocating for the use of pain management more often in gynecological procedures. Would just love to hear your thoughts on where that stands, if you feel like it's moving forward, if you have advice on how to handle it when one encounters it in medical care. I wonder how many people have had that happen to them. Exactly. A doctor either didn't believe or dismissed or minimized or refused to treat your pain in women's health care. So, thoughts on that?
Well, that's what we all talk about all the time. Healthcare providers that have evolved because pain is not normal. Starting out with menstrual cycle, young menstruators, they have a lot of cramping, but are you cramping because you're dehydrated? Because who wants to drink when they're in pain? So you really have to make sure you're hydrating that muscle. Because as you know, I'm an avid basketball fan, when muscles are dehydrated, they cramp. Cramp so much, it will knock you to the ground. And so hydration's key. Decreasing stress is key. There's so many reasons why one cramps. But if you address all those reasons and you still have painful cramps, you need to be evaluated. And when you go to your healthcare provider's office, if they're not hearing you, and if you're like me, like, listen, I've asked you a question you haven't answered. If they are not capable of, and some people have limits. We all have limitations. Find another healthcare provider. Well, I'm getting to that. Yeah. So ruling out the medical issues, now you have to come to someone like us who do surgery. And that's why, again, taking you to an operative procedure has risks. I do lots of minimally invasive procedures where I put a 5mm scope through your belly button, and that's how a lot of endometriosis is diagnosed, because there are people who have extensive endometriosis with no symptoms. There's no correlation with the amount of implants you have that will determine what your symptoms are. I've had patients where they have what we call the frozen pelvis, who no symptoms. I've had patients where I barely could see implants and they have pain off the gazoo. But when you start manipulating these inflamed tissue areas, then you're risking causing adhesions, and adhesions can cause pain. And so after all of that, if you continue to have pain and your provider is frustrated because they've done all of that they feel they can do and have not addressed your pain, there are other options. There are people who train as pain management experts, and you need a referral to that person. So never let someone block you in terms of getting a person that may be have access to more knowledge.
Can I chime in from the patient side really quickly? 3 things that I've done. So with my sepsis, even though I was in labor and like bleeding out and everything was crashing, I had acute respiratory distress syndrome. So I had a PICC line in my neck, in my jugular, I think. My grandmother was the first person to actually say something else is wrong, because they knew I was crashing. They knew I would have to go to the ICU and be on life support. But when she looked at my skin, she said, "Why does she look like that?" And they're like what? She said, "Her skin color's off." And anyone who knows like the stages of sepsis, one of the classic indicators is something called mottled skin. But on a Caucasian patient, it looks different. I'm a Black woman. My mottled looks different. And so having a friend or having a loved one in the room was important, because I was able to get culturally competent care. I have a friend who designed an app to diagnose skin cancer, and you just scan, like you scan a QR code, you scan your tumor. He created the app because his wife died 4 months pregnant. She had skin cancer in her scalp, and they told her it was a beauty mark, and it spread, and she had dreadlocks. So, another warning sign of that. The other thing that I have found when pain is ignored, like right now, they're looking at hormonal birth control for men. They had previously stopped the trials because men couldn't stand the pain or the symptoms associated with it. But like on TikTok, you see women telling the story of getting their IUD placed, and there was nothing. I am also someone who has had an abortion in college. Because I didn't have a loved one in the room, I got no pain meds. I got nothing and had to go through that, awake and normal. And so when I feel like I'm not being heard, the first thing I do is say, okay, if you're not going to do XYZ, I want you to note it in my chart. And I want to see the chart and make sure it's there, because at the very least, it will be documented that you asked for something and your request was not honored, or you were ignored. And then you have this paper trail that sets up a timeline and a precedent should something happen, where you went and you did all you could do for yourself.
Thank you. I mean, both of these are amazing responses. I think if I were to recommend a toolkit, if you have to go in and you have apprehension, like learning, you can use Dr. Google if it helps. You can also ask your doctor or the nurse that's in a team, like, what is this procedure? What's going to happen?
ChatGPT.
Yep.
Tell me in layman's terms.
There's some problems, but good, getting some information. Like you can even say, I learned this on ChatGPT. Is it true people have this much pain, or the risk of infections like 20% if you don't do X, Y, or Z, while I would like to think that these would be standard counseling, you never know what you're getting. I feel like we're privileged in this state, but still problems happen. There's been a lot of concern around, there was a situation where anesthesia wasn't being administered for IVF procedures. In my fertility practice, we have an anesthesiologist. We talk through what's going to happen. There's also this concept of trauma-informed care that's coming through gynecology, and we've also even gotten instructions and information on offering everyone for an IUD placement appropriate analgesia, and it's now a policy. So I think things are changing, but I don't think that this is happening everywhere. And so asking about what are the options, sharing if you're concerned about anything going near, the vagina internal exams, just to say what you need. And of course, if you feel like you're dissociating in the time of the exam, you should really have it be stopped, or the intervention, because that is not a healthy response to any procedure that can cause problems in, seeking care in the future. So self-advocacy and some knowledge before you go in, I think, are really, really important.
And highlighting the self-advocacy, since I do take care of a large gender diverse population, if you have had a bad experience because of an inappropriate size speculum, for example, when you're going for that pelvic exam and pap smear, ask your provider, what size speculum are you using? Can you show it to me, please? And if you have a comfortable provider, there should be no problem with that. And you don't need a large, long, grave speculum, which means it's wide, it's long. If you have a vaginal introitus that big, I take care of adults. I mean, where I work, I can't take care of anyone less than 17. But I have pediatric speculums. because depending on what I'm looking for, I can use a really tiny thing to place into the vault. So if you've had negative experiences, let your current, particularly if they're new to you, know what type of experience you've had in the past and what are they going to do to prevent you from experiencing that again. We can put a little lidocaine or actually on a speculum. We have all sorts of tricks that we can use to make you more comfortable.
Hi. I am a special education parent advocate, so my question is very broad. It's about navigating these issues within the disability community. If you have any advice, resources to share, really from birth to end of life, resources for parents to help make the best decisions for their young children about managing their menstruation, to empowering those same students as they get older and into young adulthood, making sure they're properly educated in a way that makes sense to them and are given the full range of options and information. There are just a lot of additional issues, both parenting somebody like that and becoming a young adult in that situation where there might be mental health needs or medications that are an issue, or they are not able to process information as well, or they may be struggling with their self-identity. There are just a lot of issues. I know it's broad, but if you know of any organizations, especially locally, doctors, programs you'd recommend that are sensitive either for parents or for young people. Thank you.
So I don't know any locally here, but I'm on the board of Johns Hopkins back in Baltimore, and we have KKI, which is the Kennedy Krieger Institute, but the entire institute is focused on disability across a broad range. It could be intellectual, it could be cerebral palsy, it could be autism spectrum disorder, and so they do provide resources. They do all types of testing. They accept people from all over the world. They will pay for your travel in. But one of the things that I found interesting is their new approach on focusing on outward solutions. For example, one of the fun things that we're doing with them is instead of manufacturing our tampons in Italy, we're going to manufacture them in Baltimore. And their adults with autism are going to be the ones getting the monthly salary for putting our tampons into our tubes. So we're providing like gainful employment, a minimum salary of $50,000, which is like even very different than some of the support services they provide. But I'm seeing that almost be a standard that is growing throughout the US. From the standpoint of advocacy on menstruation in the conversation, one of the things that we decided to do was add period briefs to our lineup online. And I forgot to say this, we have a code Menstrual for everyone in today's summit to get a 20% discount at femly.com. But we added the briefs because we know that depending on your body's ability, you might be in a wheelchair, you might not be able to change a pad or a tampon or insert it. There could be some fine and gross motor challenges. And so if you have a caretaker, it's easier to put on a brief that can stay for 12 hours leak-free and just be thrown into the wash than it is a pad. But on both sides, on the corporate solutions and advocacy side, we're seeing a lot of movement. On the for-profit, public-private partnership, I'm noticing a lot of movement. And I think overall it's making me really, really optimistic because though Sage, my daughter, isn't here, I remember the conversation being, there could be some challenges if she is born. And so that is always something that is now top of mind.
I think if students are younger in sub-separate programming, I would ensure that they are getting the same sexual health and health education as the regular education students.
I'm happy to recommend some providers too, and we can follow up. Yeah.
Amazing. Awesome. Well, give us a round of applause for our incredible panelists.
Sasha, can I just add one thing?
Of course.
Can I just promote the legislation and supporting the legislation? Because although I was able to get it put onto my budget, it would be the first thing to be cut. But most policies in education come from either regulation or laws. And so we have to do them. They have to fund them. So if this legislation passes, it's a budget item that can't be cut. So I just want to promote support of that from all of you and all of your friends and families. Thanks.
And thank you to Kyla, who has put our brand new fact sheets and action alerts here on the screen. So we are launching this right now, actually, like this moment. This is a brand new action alert that you can scan to write your legislators if you're based here in Massachusetts. What's different is that this year, this legislative session, we are not just talking about the I Am bill, which would make menstrual products free in schools, prisons, and shelters, but we're also advocating for another bill that would make menstrual products free in all public buildings, because they should be everywhere. And also a bill that would mandate ingredient disclosure for menstrual products. That would make Massachusetts the third state to do this. New York and California have already done it. But what we need your help in communicating to legislators is that it's not enough to just have menstrual products be free. We need to be ensuring quality access for menstrual products. And there's a lot of resistance to that in the legislature, to be quite honest. There's a lot of legislators who said, I understood the I Am bill. I don't understand everything else that you're talking about. And so that's why we need your personal writing to your legislator to break it down for them. And so if you scan this QR code, we'll give you a ton of talking points. You can use them, copy and paste, not use them at all. But it's a first stop to contacting your legislators. And our ask is to get them to co-sponsor this legislation. And if you wrote your legislator last year, thank you. We need you to do it again, because the legislative session has restarted. The bills got refiled. They have new bill numbers. And I guess I would be remiss to say that we are having our Advocacy Day in just 2 weeks on Thursday, February 6th at the State House. And it is our hope that you will take all the knowledge you learned today and come join us in person at the State House to meet with your legislator and break it down for them about why menstrual products should be in all public building bathrooms and why we need quality menstrual products distributed. If you have questions about that, you can ask me or any of the Mass Now team. You can raise your hand. We got Kathy and Kyla, and Jem, I believe, is outside somewhere. All right, before we break for lunch, I have one more ask for all of you. If you'd be so kind and willing, we would love to take a photo, a selfie photo, but with Daniela's help, of everyone here in this room. Just because I'm so surprised so many people came out on a Saturday to talk about periods in person.